One. We'd like to welcome each of you again to the Abundant Life Podcast. This is episode 7 of the Abundant Life Podcast, and we're thankful that you've chosen to join us and be a part of it, and we hope that this can be a blessing to you in your life. My name is Brian Egerton, and again joined by John Ferguson, and we're both ministers at the North Lexington Church of Christ in Lexington, Kentucky. Both of us have spent time studying in the field of counseling, and so we wanted to use some of that training to help those who may be struggling with different mental or emotional or physical issues that may be going on in your life. And these are real things that people deal with, and we want to be able to look at them from a sociological perspective, a physiological perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective, and talk about how God can help see us through these different challenges we may be facing in life. This week, we're going to begin a two-part series dealing with conflict. So this week, as we begin our discussion on conflict, we're going to look at the negative side of conflict and notice some of the challenges that may come with it, and notice some of the results that can come when conflict isn't dealt with properly. So we're going to focus on the negative side this week, and next week we'll focus on the positive side of conflict and talk about conflict resolution and some of those kinds of things. So as we begin our discussion here of conflict, let's begin with kind of maybe a broad thought about conflict. Why is it that you think that there's so much conflict in our world? Why is conflict so common in our world?
Well, number one, our world is comprised of different people. Different people come from different backgrounds, different personalities, life experiences, goals, and those things like that. Since we differ, they often come into conflict, or we just have a difficulty coming to understanding. So there are a number of things that bring the potential conflicts about.
Yeah, it's interesting because the world is so full of different people with these different backgrounds and everything. And so sometimes when we don't understand the other person's background or the other person's history or their life experiences, then it can lead to a conflict because we view it from our perspective.
Yes.
So all of these differences can easily lead to conflict. But it's important that as we think about conflict to realize a few things. Number one, it's important to realize that conflict is a natural thing.
Oh yeah.
Conflict is something that when it happens, we shouldn't be concerned that there's something's wrong, there's a problem, because conflict is a natural thing in our world. And to build on that, it's important for us to understand that differences don't equal conflict.
Correct.
What does that mean? What does it mean for differences to not equal conflict? How is that the case?
The idea of differences and conflict. Well, we have different ideas. We got different things we want to do. You might want to, let's just say, just for instance, one person wants to go to this particular place at this time. The other would think they need to go at another time. Well, we just got a difference in opinion as to what would be the best time for us to go. However, if a person wants to go this particular event, but at the same time you have a somewhat of a demanded event or work schedule that you need to be in, and they try to do that, then it is no longer just a personal choice of choosing, but now it becomes a conflict, either this or that, or it causes some friction and confusion between those people whom are involved. And so differences is just simply, I believe this, and I believe that, but then we get into conflict where it interrupts our lives, and to a degree that it, call for some difficult choices.
Sure. So just because we have differences of opinion or different thoughts about something, that doesn't automatically mean that we're in conflict with each other, right? Some of these simple things in life, maybe I love hamburgers, but you love pizza.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that doesn't, just because we don't love the same things, that doesn't mean that we have a conflict with one another.
No.
It just means we have difference of opinion. So it's important that we realize that just because someone thinks about something different or views something different than we do, that doesn't mean that it has to turn into a conflict.
That's
We
true.
can make it a conflict.
Oh, yeah.
But just because we have different things, that doesn't mean that we're in conflict with
That's
one
right.
another.
That's right.
So this idea of conflict is something that it's natural. It's a part of life. Differences don't mean there's conflict, and in fact, different perspectives are actually can actually add value to us.
Oh, yes.
So just because we have a different perspective, you have a different perspective than me, that doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm right.
That's correct.
Or that I'm wrong and you're right. But in fact,
point.
our different perspectives can actually help enhance one another and make each other better.
I believe you're right. I believe you're right. You know, the ideal of this, we bring these various experiences and things, choices and things, and that we just differ. Like you gave the example about the pizza. You know, the other person may like it, may be a vegetarian or something, and then then all of a sudden, you know, you taste it and say, oh, that's not bad at all. However, now if you just strictly stick with the point of, oh, we're gonna do vegetarian, we ain't doing nothing else, then we got a problem. But we can enhance each other's life through our differences, because we introduce different things into our life that could really, add something to it.
Sure. So we've kind of laid some groundwork here for what conflict really is. But really, there are a number of different types of conflict that we may experience in this world. Talk a little bit about some of the different types of conflict that maybe we could go through.
Well, there are the intrapersonal and the interpersonal, and I want to talk about those two first, and then we'll talk about another kind of close group. We have intrapersonal conflict is where we have some different things. There are two choices, and we're often at a conflict here. Sometimes it's a very moral thing, something for us to do that impacts us individually. We may have a choice of saying, hey, I don't know, I'm at work and something has gone wrong, and perhaps I know all about it, or I may have been part of it. I can either tell someone that I was part of it, and I'll probably face some serious reprimands, or I may even lose a job for that, or I can just deny that I had a part of it and I maintain that job. So I'm at a intrapersonal conflict. I can either say I'm going to be honest and tell it, or I can not be honest and don't say anything and keep the job. That's an intrapersonal kind of conflict that you'll have. Now, when you get down to the interpersonal conflict, we back again to the work site. You may have somebody that you're chatting there with. You two, we not only do we just disagree on something that we think, in an abstract way, but sometimes just doing something, we could really differ for that. We are to work together as a group, as a team. However, if you begin to slack off, or if the other person begin to slack off and expect you to come forward and do it, now we got an interpersonal conflict here, because you having me doing more than I am, for which I'm responsible, and that's an interpersonal conflict. It's not a difference anymore. It's a conflict, because they're saying, you want me to do something that I'm not supposed to do. Those are two. Then you got the other one, the intergroup and the intra-group, kind of a conflict as well. The ideal of this intra-group is that you may have a group that's separate from the rest of the group within this particular organization, and then you got some problem with the group that's separate from the other group. So they have some inner group squabbles. Can't come to an agreement, okay? And they got a problem. It may be a specific ministry at your church or whatever, and things like that. And then you may have it to a much broader one, an interpersonal one, to where you're going to have that just a congregation as a whole may just have some issues or conflict or some serious differences here. So you got a smaller group where maybe 2 or 3 or more may be having some issues, but then you got that interim one where it's even broader than that. So you may have groups battling their own their own selves, and so those kind of things conflict, those intergroup and those intra groups. So you may find that a lot, like the disciples, the apostles, and you find it within churches, those kind of things that happen.
It's interesting. If we look at that first pairing that you talked about, you guys, your intrapersonal and interpersonal. We talk about intrapersonal battling within ourselves.
Yes.
And interpersonal battling with someone else.
Yes.
And it's interesting to think about that because oftentimes both of those sets of conflicts, they come with their different sets of challenges.
Yes.
But one's not easier than another. Sometimes we're battling with something inside ourselves, and we're just torn, and it messes with our emotions. Maybe we're not sleeping right or eating right anymore. It can have these really serious effects on us.
Big time.
But same thing's true with these interpersonal things. When you have a conflict with someone else, it can really affect your work ethic. It can affect your mindset and your attitude. And so both of these, whether it's an intrapersonal or interpersonal or intragroup or intergroup, they can both have profound effects on us if we don't deal with them correctly.
Oh, yeah. And I've had people that I've seen in places before, in workplaces, that some people are so frustrated with the lack of cohesiveness among themselves and agreement. Some of them just simply say, I hate this place. And it's bothering me. I can't sleep. And as you just said, you're right on with that. And those kinds of things happen. They impact us physically, emotionally, socially, and everything. And that causes us to go down in our office place, in our productivity, and it has an impact on us as far as our relationships at home. Those are some difficult things to do.
So we realize that conflict is a natural thing, and that it's something that's really inevitable whenever we're dealing with people.
Yes.
It's just going to be it's a part of life. But there are certain things that can sometimes escalate.
Yes.
Conflict. We next week we're going to talk about how to resolve conflict and fix conflict. But there are things that can be done that end up escalating the conflict.
Yes.
I think about things like if you and I have a conflict with one another, but we decide to go and tell other people to get people on our side. I want to get my team against John's team.
Yes.
So now instead of you and I just having a conflict and working through something, we've divided this group of people and got teams and allowed this problem to become something bigger than it was. So sometimes when we have a conflict with someone, it begins to escalate when we try to bring in bystanders and have them take sides with it. Maybe we could have had a simple conversation and work through it.
Yeah, just straight up in Matthew, I think 18 is kind of something of that sort. When people can work together. If somebody's offended or some problem there, say you'll go and you two try to work those things out. But no, we try to go and we tell everybody before we even try to work things through. That causes a lot of animosity, and it's kind of difficult working through not only differences but conflict when there's animosity there. That's a tough one.
I think the logic that Jesus gave of when you have a conflict with someone, you go when you talk to them in person, and then bring someone else, and then bring it before the church. There's a lot of wisdom in that, because the quicker you can talk to that person and work it through yourselves, the less likely it's going to escalate into something that's going to involve other people and become a big problem. So there's a lot of wisdom in just dealing with it instead of getting people on sides.
You couldn't be more right than that.
So another thing I think about in something that escalates conflict is when people are so emotionally driven in the conflict. When we're dealing with emotionally charged topics and subjects, then it's going to cause this conflict to become greater because we're not thinking clearly. We're acting maybe rashly instead of sitting down and using logic and working through something. So in emotionally charged situations, conflict can really become escalated if it's not dealt with properly.
You better believe it. And I tell you what, we all stake out our own emotional turf, and we're not always willing to give in no time. So, and we're not thinking clearly. It's all about how I'm feeling at the moment, and And I do believe, as you just said, when we can get through and work around and sort through the feelings and get down to the rational, I do believe that we can perhaps, even if we don't get all the conclusions we want, we have some kind of path to come through to something more civil and sensible.
So we recognize that conflict can be a real problem, and if it's not dealt with properly, it can lead to a lot of real issues, whether it's within ourselves or among our relationships with other people. Conflict can be a real problem. But what I want us to do, as we're thinking about conflict and the negative side of conflict, I want us to spend some time considering several reasons that conflict arise. And as we look at Scripture, there are numerous examples of conflict people went into, and we can see the reason the conflict happened. And so I want us just to consider a few of these and understand maybe how those, when they're not dealt with properly, how those can really sever relationships and really hurt unity. So this first thing I want us to notice, that a reason why conflict may arise is because of jealousy.
Yeah.
Let's think for a minute about Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4.
Yeah.
You remember Cain and Abel were the sons of Adam and Eve.
Yes.
And Abel was a shepherd. He took care of the animals, and Cain was a gardener. Right? So both of them had their roles, and both of them, when it came time for them to offer a sacrifice to God, the expectation was they were going to take what was best of theirs, and they were going to offer that to God.
Yes.
Abel did that very thing. Right? He found the firstlings of his flock, the fattest, the best animals he had. He offered those to God, and as a result, God respected his sacrifice. But Cain did something different. Right? We're not told exactly what his sacrifice looked like in Genesis chapter 4, but what we're told is that God did not respect his sacrifice. So more likely what that means is he didn't give the best. Maybe he took the best for himself or for others and offered God what was left over, and so God didn't respect his offering. And so Cain here, he's viewing the situation, and he becomes jealous because God accepted Abel's, his brother's sacrifice, but not his. And his jealousy became so strong within him that he took action where he ultimately killed his brother out of jealousy. Instead of trying to fix his problem or say, you know what, if I just offer a better sacrifice to God, God's going to accept it. Instead of working through the problem in that way, he let his jealousy cause such a conflict between him and his brother that he ultimately killed his brother.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That jealousy / envy that's a difficult thing, because if you look at the success of others, and you are seen in a different light, or you even see yourself in such a far different light, it can cause some animosity. And as the proverb writer said, that envy is the rottenness of the bone. I mean, it'll gnaw at you. It'll really eat away at you emotionally. It can cause some bad things to you physically, emotionally, and then after it, he just couldn't take that, being, quote, on the outside looking in, so to speak, and he just did something he ought not have done. That is, that he lashed out at his brother rather than looking within, as you just said.
You know, jealousy is something that we experience in our lives on a regular basis too. Especially, you know, I think about children and how often jealousy is a big problem for them. You know, maybe you have a group of children playing together, and you know, I see this a lot really after Christmas. Maybe one kid got the toy that everyone wants, but someone else, the other kid, didn't, and so. So now, you know, these kids, they come to church and a lot of times bring these new toys they got for Christmas, and one of them has that one toy, but the other one, man, I want that toy. I can't believe I didn't get that toy.
That's right.
So now that they're maybe no longer content with what they have or what they were given, and all they can think about is that toy that I really wanted that other person has. But it's not just something that happens in kids. Right? Jealousy happens all throughout our life.
Yes.
And maybe the source of jealousy is lack of contentment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not content with what I have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not happy with where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want what someone else has. That's going to make me the
Yes.
most happy. So the problem happens when we move from this feeling of, man, I really want something, to this jealousy, to an envy where I'm going to do whatever it takes
Well,
to get what I want.
it happens a lot. I mean, you sit back there in Lincoln, and they got all the accolades, the flowers, the balloons, and everything. You look at yourself, you want it, and the best way to do it sometimes is to get it, as one man said, by any means necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens sometimes. As I said, this envy is a rottenness of the bone, and it can really drain your life, and it can really mess with your mind as far as that's concerned.
Envy and jealousy can cause great conflict because we're willing to do whatever it takes at the expense of someone else, like you mentioned.
That's it.
And so when we begin hurting other people to get what we want, then there's naturally going to be some conflict because nobody likes to be hurt.
That's it.
So we see this in the life of Cain and Abel. We see it in the lives of children today, but we see it in the lives of adults in many ways too.
Gotcha.
And if we're not careful about handling our jealousy, then it can cause great conflict in our life.
Big time. Big time.
So let's notice a second thing we can learn from Scripture about reasons why conflict may arise. The second thing I want us to notice is that is because of broken trust or perceived broken trust.
Okay.
In the Old Testament, we see Moses, who was called by God to lead the nation of Israel out of Egypt. Remember, they were in bondage in Egypt, and they had been crying out to God, asking for God to deliver them because they were in such torment and agony and suffering at the hands of the Egyptians. And so God prepares Moses to lead the nation of Israel out of Egypt, and he promises to the nation of Israel that they're going to be taken care of. Life is going to be so much better than they had it in Egypt. They're going to be taken to a land that flows with milk and honey.
There you go.
So this is the mindset the nation of Israel had as they began to leave Egypt under the leadership of Moses.
Yes.
The problem was, as they were traveling, and before they made it to the promised land, there were times where they struggled finding food they thought they needed or water they needed.
Yes.
And so they began to think that maybe Moses and God had lied to them about what they should expect. In fact, in Exodus chapter 16, but this is just one of the times where they begin complaining because they feel like Moses or God broke their trust.
Yes.
Notice what they said in Exodus chapter 16 and verse 3. It said, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." So here they're looking at Moses, and they're complaining to Moses, saying, "You're going to kill us out here. We had all the food we needed in Egypt,
Yeah.
but you've let us out here with this expectation we're being a land that flows with milk and honey, but instead we're going hungry. We're going to die for it." So to the nation of Israel, they viewed Moses and God as breaking their trust, as promising something and then not following through with it. So as a result, it was a constant source of conflict between Moses and the people.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's amazing to me how we're so quick to exchange freedom for comfort and security, and they upset. You left us out here. We may have been in bondage, but at least we had something to eat. Now, what a trade-off that is. But anyway, they really didn't like some of Moses' choices, and they just thought he was a person who had really failed them. And yes, and then the idea comes up next, since we out here, we need to do something else. Maybe Moses ain't the leader after all. And people want to tend to kind of rise in there. These are siblings now. It's amazing how that little rift can get there, that little schism can get there, that great conflict can grow at that moment. But as you said, that was a sad situation to be in, and yet at the same time they want to move forward. That's really something to think about.
It's my experience that there are a few things that lead to greater conflict than broken trust. There are a few things that lead to more disagreements than broken trust. And I think we've all maybe experienced that from time to time. Maybe even someone that we were really close to, whether it's a spouse or a close friend or a colleague or someone that we had a lot of respect for and a lot of trust in, and maybe they do something that breaks that trust. And sometimes, even with the people that we're closest to in life, when trust is broken, it's not easy to mend it. I think we see that in a lot of examples in Scripture. And maybe we've done it to other people. Mm-hmm. Maybe we've broken the trust in someone else. And so in those moments where maybe trust has been broken, what can be done to help mend that broken trust? How can we fix that when we've broken trust in someone?
I think that which develop it at first is also that which will mend it at the last. In other words, trust comes by people excelling at something or delivering on something. When people trust you, is that you have done something that was trustworthy, and then you develop that trustworthiness about you. So what we'll need to do, we can apologize, we can offer, our sincere apologies, but what you need then is action. I would simply say that action speaks louder than words. That's how you mend it. You talk about where you may have failed or did not accomplish what you wanted, but at the same time, you have to start that over again, showing that you are worthy of their trust. And the only way you do that is by making sound decision and really showing some good movement and accomplishments. When you do that, people will begin to really trust you because you are now trustworthy. You have said something, and now you have delivered on that which you had promised.
So what I hear you saying is that in order to rebuild trust, it's going to take time.
It's going to take some time.
Yeah, so it's not an overnight thing. We break someone's trust, not an overnight thing where things are going to be fixed.
That's true.
But we have to rebuild that reputation and that trustworthiness in the mind of someone, so that they can believe that we're not going to go back on what we've said or treat them wrong or break that trust again. And that's maybe hard.
It is.
Especially when it's someone that we love, someone that we're close to, when we break that trust, and we want things to be back to normal immediately.
Yes.
But that's not the case. No. It's hard to work through and mend a broken heart and mend these broken relationships and broken trust. And so we have to be willing to put the work in. We have to be willing to put the time in.
Yes.
And show that individual that we are sorry, that we're ready to make a change to ensure we don't do that again.
That's right. Correct. Good point.
So here we've seen the second thing that can cause conflict in our lives, and that's broken trust, whether it's real or perceived in the mind of the individual. Yeah. Here's a third thing we can learn from Scripture. A third cause of conflict is differences of opinion.
Yes.
Let's think together about Paul and Barnabas in Acts chapter 15. Okay, really, their relationship goes way back, or earlier than Acts chapter 15. But in really Acts chapter 13, we see they were called by the Holy Spirit to go on these missionary journeys.
Yes.
So this was a really important task that they were given. It was an honor for them to be chosen to do this, to go into all these different cities, to travel around the area and preach the gospel.
Yes.
So we see where Paul and Barnabas took this very, very serious in what they were doing. So they chose to take along with them a man by the name of John Mark. Right?
Okay.
They chose him to be their helper. They needed some assistance. They needed some help along their way. So they chose someone they thought that they could trust, someone that they thought they could count on to help them in this journey. The problem was, we see in Acts chapter 13 and verse 13 that for whatever reason, we're not told exactly why, but John Mark chose to leave them and go back to Jerusalem. Now, clearly, this did not sit well with Paul. This bothered Paul that John Mark would just turn back and leave them after they had entrusted him with this role.
Yes.
So they finished the rest of this missionary journey on their own, and now in Acts chapter 15, we see where they're preparing to go on a second missionary journey. Go back and revisit these churches they had been with and encourage them again. They're deciding who they're going to take with them. Barnabas, he decides that he wants to take John Mark back with them again.
Okay.
But Paul, he was ready to be done with John Mark. So he wanted nothing to do with John Mark, did not want John Mark to go. So they had different opinions about who to take with them. But notice how serious this conflict became.
Yes.
Acts chapter 15 and verse 38, the Bible says, "Then the contention became so sharp that they, being Paul and Barnabas, parted from one another."
Yeah.
So these two individuals who were so close, had such a close friendship, had such a good relationship with one another.
Yeah.
They had such strong difference of opinions over who to take with them that they chose they were going to separate from themselves and go their own way. We already talked a little bit about how differences don't necessarily mean conflict, right? So they had different opinions. That didn't mean there had to be a conflict, but it turned into a conflict.
Yeah.
So why? What is it that causes differences to actually turn into a conflict?
The idea of it is the like you were talking about the escalation of that and the impact that it has on the people involved. Now we can have differences, as we talked about earlier about some things aren't so consequential. It's not a life or death or sadness or gladness kind of a thing, but this one was totally different. This is going to have impact not only on the two of them, but on other folks as well. So that's kind of escalated. It's not completely altogether a personal thing, but yet at the same time, there's some personal things to it. So he felt that he'd be let down. He doesn't want that. So that moved over from now it's not just a personal thing. This is something totally different. And so that's quick how their relationship kind of dissolved like that and went away. But when it moves from a personal difference as to say who can do this, who can speak louder, who can speak longer, now it's a personal thing because it is something personal that taken place. And there was a dissolving of the level of trust.
You're right. It seems like when it's simply matters of opinion, oftentimes it doesn't turn into a conflict.
Right.
But when those differences end up being things that are personal or moral issues or ethical issues, things that we feel grounded in and rooted in, and we can't. We're not willing to budge on this,
right.
Then it can easily turn into a conflict. When you have two immovable objects
right.
that are trying to work something out, then you're never going to meet in the middle.
Nope.
So here we see Paul and Barnabas. Paul was adamant, we're not taking John Mark because he left us. We can't trust him anymore. This goes back to our broken trust. We talked about it earlier. We can't trust him anymore.
Right.
But Barnabas says, well, let's give him another chance. Let's encourage him. He's grown some. He's learned some. He's gonna do great this time.
Yes.
Both of them were firm on this, and neither of them wanted to move on it. And as a result, this great conflict happened where Paul and Barnabas split ways. So when we think about our lives and we think about the conflicts that we're involved in, we recognize that it's okay to be different.
Yes.
And we should. Differences are good. But there are certain differences that when we're rooted and grounded in them, that when we're not willing to budge, it can easily lead to that conflict.
I'll tell you, when they start to getting to the point where they challenge our position and have sense of undermine our moral compass, so to speak, then it becomes a matter of a conflict. Somebody said, "Hey, we're going to leave at the 12th hour," and this, well, I think we need to leave at the 6th hour. That may not be too much of a thing, but when it involves a moral compass, then it's really a conflict at this time because it's a right or wrong involved. And at this time, it's not right, it may not be good, and it's not helpful. So we got a conflict here. We don't have just a difference. And if that's the case, with me, I don't want that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's a problem.
Yeah. Here that we've seen three now reasons that sometimes conflict arise. Let's notice a fourth real quick. A fourth reason that conflict can maybe arise in our life is because of selfishness. And maybe some of this goes similar discussion to our discussion on jealousy, but I think there are differences here. So let's think about selfishness for a minute and how that can cause conflict in our lives. And I really love the example of the apostles,
Okay.
and how they there was a time where their jealousy caused great conflict even
Big
within
time.
the apostles. You see in Matthew chapter 20, there's a really interesting conversation that takes place, and it takes place between Jesus and James and John and their mother. Right, so two of his apostles and then their mother are having a conversation with Jesus, and the basis of their conversation was about position in the kingdom that Jesus was establishing. You see, there was a lot of confusion in the first century, even among the apostles, about the type of kingdom Jesus was going to establish. Jesus was coming to establish this heavenly kingdom, the spiritual
Yes.
kingdom,
But
many of the disciples, they viewed this as a earthly kingdom, a
Gotcha.
physical kingdom. So the mother of James and John goes to Jesus and says, when your kingdom is established, can my sons sit on your right hand and on your left hand? Can my sons be in the position of power in this kingdom? And Jesus, in his response to her, tells her, I don't have the authority to do that. That God has the authority to choose who sits on the right and on the left. But as this conversation is happening, the other disciples overhear this discussion. And we're told that they become angry with James and John
Yes.
because of this conversation. It seems to me that the source of their anger was their selfishness because they wanted those positions of power.
Okay.
If James and John are going to get those positions of power, that means I don't get it. So they become angry because of their selfishness, and this conflict arises
Yes.
even among the apostles.
Yes. I tell you what, we're going back again as we talk about the different types of conflict. Now we got back again. We got this it's somewhat a little different, this intergroup and this intra-group, kind of a combination of both right here. There's a problem. Everybody want the top seat, and everybody want to be like this and this, and that's a conflict. Who's going to be first? Who's going to be second? Who's going to get to be, well, we want to say the head one, so to speak. And there's a problem here. And if Jesus doesn't get to it quickly enough, we're going to have some big time problem. And so that's a problem. It's selfishness, wanting the power, the prestige, the prominence. That was a problem. And so, but the good Lord went to work on that to deal with that.
You think about what if that conflict within the apostles had continued to escalate and become bigger and bigger? How effective could they have been in what they were trying to accomplish?
Oh, that one would simply be saying there would have been a cold standstill, seem as though. But one we could assume that would happen. Looks like it just from a human standpoint that would have been the case. Wouldn't been too much moving. They're just trying to position, and that would have been a bad thing.
Well, let's think about how that maybe applies to the church today.
Yes.
Oftentimes maybe we become concerned about ourselves and being in these positions, or being recognized, or being known for certain things, and our selfishness maybe drives us and motivates to do certain things. And sometimes that selfishness can cause conflict even within those that maybe we worship with, or that we're our fellow Christians. And when we allow selfishness or any of these factors to cause conflict within one another, this intra-group conflict, then it's going to hinder the effectiveness that we have to be lights to the world, to make disciples, to do what God calls us to do. So one of the key messages that in all of Scripture that we see is this idea of humility. Let's humble ourselves and put God and put others first.
Yes.
And when we are full of selfishness and allow that to enter into our hearts, then it's going to hinder us from putting others and putting God first.
I think you're right. And that's the whole problem of it, isn't it? really that not only are we just merely we thinking that we are somehow, Ryan, think that we are just merely and simply at a standstill. I beg to differ. I don't think we're at a standstill. We are at an unnoticeable, I might call, an unnoticeable regression, to be honest with you, when we have those kinds of infighting and those in struggles and that kind of conflict that isn't properly and timely addressed. So there is an unnoticeable digression among them, and then the ability of that group, the potential of that group lies dormant, and that's a sad thing.
Yeah. So selfishness can be a big cause of conflict. Again, if it's not dealt with properly. Let's consider one final thing.
Yes.
And I want us to notice this one because I think it's something that everyone that's listening can relate to, and that's conflict that arises within family because of family issues.
Yes.
We already talked about Moses and his relationship with Israel and how they had this perceived broken trust in Moses. But later on, we see where Moses ended up having conflict even within his family. And you made mention of it earlier, but he had conflict between him, his brother Aaron, and his sister Miriam. And in Numbers chapter 20, it seems like the source of this conflict that they have goes back to Moses choosing to marry an Ethiopian woman.
Yes.
Instead of marrying an Israelite, instead of marrying someone that maybe would have been more widely accepted in the eyes of others, he chose to marry an Ethiopian woman.
Yeah.
And so we see where both Aaron and Miriam are upset with this, to the point where it seems as though that maybe they're even trying to separate themselves from Moses. Maybe Moses is unfit to lead. Look at these choices he's making. Should he really be leading the nation of Israel? And notice, as Moses and Aaron are talking to each other in Numbers chapter 12 and verse 2, they said this. They said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" So here in this conversation with one another, they're thinking, well, maybe we are the ones who need to take over because Moses is making these crazy choices.
Yeah.
He's not thinking through things.
Right.
He's not fit to lead. So they begin trying to take leadership, take ownership of this, and push Moses out. And it becomes so contentious. There's such a big conflict that God has to intervene and confront Moses and Miriam about these actions. So here we see this family conflict brewing up, and really it becomes such a big problem. They're separating from one another.
I mean, when you look at families are a group unit. They have great connection, ties. They have a lot of family tradition, a lot of family customs and things of that nature that comes into that. What happens to one family member generally impacts another one, whether we admit it to some low degree or some high degree. It impacts. And so you look at Moses. Here's a brother that was that with them they hadn't been around with a long time, who finally came together with them in their leading. And like you said, he's making choices that impact the family. You're marrying in their mind a stranger. It's not of their cultural upbringing, and it's not with their particular Jewish nation. And we out here, and we got out here, didn't have any food, not married to it, but we have too many setbacks with this man, this brother, in order for us to just be given wholehearted support. So that happens a lot. We're impacted from family ties, how that kind of changes things. Look at some of the decision making as you made, and look at this marriage. He's loosening up some things. So people began to question, your what you want to call that, your consistency. And he wasn't showing a lot of that, at least in their eyes. That was a conflict because that brings about a whole lot of things going forward that change the dynamics of the Jewish nation.
Yeah. So brings to question this idea of why is it that so often there seems to be conflict within the family, and part of your explanation you gave right there answers some of that question as to why there oftentimes is conflict, and it goes actually back to a podcast we dealt with a while back, talking about family units, about how the choices we make are going to impact the life of other people. Everyone within our family are impacted by the choices of one another. So sometimes I make a choice that's not going to be good for someone else in my family. And so that's going to cause this conflict with them. And that seems to be what happened there with Moses and his siblings. But I think there are a number of different things that within the family that make it easy for conflict to happen. I think about growing up with a brother, and how I knew exactly what buttons to push in order to set him off. Right? I grew up with him, spent so much time with him. I knew what made him mad, and so when I was frustrated with him, I knew exactly what buttons to push to set him off. Sometimes when we have close relationships with people, we know so much about each other that it's easy to find the things to say that we know can upset them when we're upset, and it can lead to conflict.
Yeah. Well, we get to be around each other, like you said. We know a lot of each other. We spent days, hours, long periods of time just learning some of their, of their things, their attitudes, and what they like and don't like. And like I said, we can push the button. I'm the last of 9. So we knew how to push each other's button and what would. And so what I would like and what I would not like, what they like and what they would not like, we knew that. And sometimes, it'd be kind of strange, sometimes we just do it anyway just because we know that they ain't going to like it. We know it's going to upset them and frustrate them, get them all mad and do something. They just do it anyway. But that's a problem because we understand that we have a connection. We're going to be connected, but the choice and decision that we make can impact what I would simply say the quality of our relationships, and as far as that is concerned, and made to a degree as for the social aspect of it. So I would be thinking about that. We do that. We push each other's button, and that leads us to some way conflict because I want this, they want that, and that's a tough one.
It's sad but true that oftentimes we get into conflict with the people that we're closest to more often than anyone else. And again, sometimes it's because we know each other too well, or maybe it's because we spend too much time together, or whatever it may be. But in a family, there's going to be conflict. The more you're around someone, the greater chance that there's going to be conflict. But we need to understand and recognize that we need to try to do the things that are going to be able to de-escalate these conflicts rather than do things that are going to escalate the conflicts. And we have a lot of power within family because we do know each other so well to either make a conflict greater or to resolve a conflict. And so when it comes to family matters, we need to understand conflict is real. Conflict is going to be there, but we hold power to choose how we allow that conflict to play out. So we've looked here at 5 different things that can cause conflict. 5 different ideas that maybe we've experienced and maybe personally have experienced that have caused conflict in our life, or as someone else has done that has led to conflict in our life. But I want us to think about just a few things that we can pull from these that we need to understand and keep in mind as we're dealing with conflict, especially about how dealing with conflict in the wrong way can lead to more problems. Number one, I want us to remember that conflict leads or can lead to negative feelings between both parties involved. We've seen this. We've seen where if conflict isn't dealt with properly, then it can lead to not just momentary negative feelings, but it can lead to a lifelong change in our perception of someone based on a conflict. So as we're dealing with conflict and working through conflict, it's important that we remember that we don't do things or say things that is going to tarnish the way we view someone forever, but instead let's approach it from a standpoint where we can work through it and find common ground and continue to have a good relationship.
Yeah, that's why we need to sit down and slow down a little bit and kind of go through it, trying to figure out how we got to that place and where we go from there. Like you're saying, those feelings get kind of tough, and I've been around where family members haven't spoken to each other for years, and don't intend to. They don't show up for the family reunion. They don't go to weddings or any other kind of family event. They just closed off, and that's a sad one. That's just not a disagreement. That's a conflict.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to build on that, oftentimes in conflict, it causes us to maybe do things or say things that we regret.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes those things that we say and do can cause damage that cannot be repaired or is not easily repaired.
That's it.
So when we're in conflict with someone, it's important for us to take a deep breath. And let's take a minute and make sure we're not doing something that ultimately we're going to regret or something that we can't undo.
All right, that's true. That way we can take knives out of limbs and do a lot of repair, but when words enter the heart, there's nothing we can do.
So the final thing here that we learn from this discussion of the negative side of conflict is that conflict can lead to individuals or groups of individuals closing off to one another.
Oh, yeah.
And really what that does is sets a bad precedent for moving forward. You know, sometimes in conflict you have individuals that say, well, I'm just done with it. We're done. And so then they leave unresolved conflict. So then the next time conflict comes around or there's a problem, if you continue to not deal with it, then things continue to build, and at some point you're going to reach a breaking point. You're going to boil over. So unresolved issues can easily happen when conflict is not dealt with properly. But at some point, those conflicts are going to come to fruition, and it's going to come out in the open, and things may turn out a whole lot worse than they would have been if you dealt with it originally.
Right, and I guess that by their not addressing it, they feel like they are addressing it, which is a very sad thing, because as you said, they're going to come back worse than it was before.
So here, as we've looked at conflict this week, we've noticed the negative side of conflict. We've noticed the reality of conflict, that it's a natural thing. We've noticed that differences don't necessarily mean conflict, but when we don't deal with conflict properly, it can lead to severed relationships. It can lead to damages that cannot be repaired. So we've seen this all throughout Scripture where people dealt with conflict in a wrong way, and we've seen the repercussions for it. But here's the good thing. Conflict can, in fact, be a good thing for us. There are benefits that can come from conflict when we resolve the conflict properly. So next week, as we continue this discussion on conflict, we're going to notice the positive side of conflict. And we're going to talk about how we can properly resolve the conflict in our lives so that we can become better and we become stronger even through the conflict we may deal with in our lives. We want to thank you for joining us and spending time with us considering this idea of conflict. And we hope that this can challenge your thinking a little bit as you deal with conflict that may arise in the future. We hope that you'll join us again next Thursday at noon here on the Abundant Life Podcast as we continue our discussion on conflict. Thank you for joining us.